Okay, so we now know that when selecting an option contract, that there are three variables in the contract that we need to select based on our theory. We choose the stock we have a price speculation on, and then we pick how much time we believe it will take for price action to follow our theory, and then the strike price, where we believe the stock price will end up above or below. Depending on that theory, we can then choose a put contract or a call contract, or which one will better suit our theory. That brings us to today's lesson, where we'll be now examining how to know when to take a put contract. To better understand that, we will be looking at the terms of agreement when entering a put. This is critical knowledge in understanding how to make a favorable transaction when selecting a contract. Specifically, we'll be looking at how stock price action relative to our chosen strike price will affect the outcomes for both buyer and seller when entering a put. Let's have a look.
With every contract filled, there is a buyer and a seller, and every contract commences with the contract buyer paying a premium to the contract seller. Let's look at what they are agreeing to when they enter a put. The contract buyer agrees that if stock price ends up below their strike price during the contract period, they have the right, but not the obligation, to sell 100 shares contained within that contract to the contract seller at the strike price value. This is above the current value. They will profit by selling shares for more than what they are worth. This is referred to as assignment. Let's take a closer look. If 100 shares are obtained at the current price for $50 times 100, so $5,000 in total, and then sold at the strike price of $60 times 100, so $6,000 in total, then that's a $1,000 profit minus the initial premium paid, which will be small compared to the profit made.
Take your time and rewatch if you need to. When you're ready, let's take a look at the same example, but from the perspective of the contract seller.
The contract seller agrees that if stock price ends up below the strike price during the contract period, and if the buyer initiates assignment, they are obligated to buy 100 shares contained within that contract from the contract buyer at the strike price value. This is above the current value. They will lose by buying shares for more than what they are worth. This is referred to as assignment. Let's take a closer look. If 100 shares are bought at $60 times 100, so $6,000 in total, but the shares are only worth $50 times 100, so $5,000 in total, then that's a $1,000 loss. They can still keep the initial premium, but that will be small compared to the loss made.
Okay, get comfortable with those terms of agreement. Now, that first example is assuming that at expiry, price ends up below our put strike price. So let's take a look at the second alternative where at expiry, price ends up above our strike price.
If stock price stays above the strike price during the contract period, then it is extremely unlikely the contract buyer will initiate assignment to sell 100 shares. There would be no point. Let's take a closer look. If 100 shares are obtained at the current price of $70 times 100, so $7,000 in total, and then sold at the strike price of $60 times 100, so $6,000 in total, then that's a $1,000 loss. It wouldn't make sense to do that. No assignment occurs. But remember, they paid the initial premium to the contract seller. That is not returned to them, so that is a small loss.
Let's take a look at that same example, but from the perspective of the contract seller.
If stock price stays above the strike price during the contract period, then it is extremely unlikely that the contract seller will be subjected to assignment of those 100 shares. As explained before, there would just be no point. No assignment occurs. But remember, they received the initial premium from the contract buyer, so this will be a small gain.
Hopefully now you've understood how a put can lead to an advantageous transaction for both the buyer and seller, depending on where price action ends up at expiry relative to the strike price level. So let's take a look at the key takeaways.
To commence a contract, the contract buyer will pay a premium to the contract seller. For a put contract, if price ends up below the strike price during the contract period, the buyer has the right, but not the obligation, to sell 100 shares contained within the option contract for a profit. The contract seller is obligated to buy those 100 shares for a loss. This benefits the contract buyer. If price stays above the strike price during the contract period, the contract buyer will not exercise the sale of those 100 shares as it would equate to a loss, but the contract seller keeps the initial premium paid. This benefits the contract seller.
Okay, next video, we will be examining the same terms of agreement, but for a call contract. See you then. Have a good day.